How's everyone doing? I know everybody's probably hungry. I did accept this talk slot knowing that everybody's like, all right, dude, get over with it. It's very weird speaking with something on your head no matter how much practice you do on your talk. So, here we go. If you didn't recognize me in real life, you might recognize me on the internet. My name's Adam Morse. I'm very excited to be here. I know everybody says that, but I'm actually extremely excited to be here. I got the invitation for this talk immediately after I had gotten my visa, which I worked a year to get. So I was like, oh, I can travel throughout Europe and talk about some of the things I've been thinking about for the last 2 years. Well, probably longer, but for a dedicated 2 years. So you can find me on Twitter there and GitHub and make fun of my code or make fun of my jokes. And these are two of the projects I've worked on that you might have stumbled across on the internet. Actually, I got so nervous about this headset being on, I completely forgot to talk about my introduction, which is, thank you so much for the conference organizers putting all of this together, because dealing with a bunch of people like me who are slow to respond to email and putting all the lights together, this is a lot of work. So I know a bunch of people are going to ask to give an applause, but I think that we should give everybody an applause. And before I really dive into the meat of my act here, I would like to ask a big favor of everybody, which is that we're going to be together for a few days. I would love to chat with you about all the stuff that I talk about, so please feel free to come up. Don't be shy. I'm very shy, so don't worry about it. And I'm also going to ask you that if I use gendered language, I would like you to call me out on it, because I think it matters a lot, right? We don't have 50% women in this audience right now, which mathematically is weird because they make up a good 50% of the planet. And we have non-binary people too, right? And all of these people need to be represented and understood, and we need to be good about the language you use because it excludes people. And I would love to see less people that look exactly like me in the industry. So please feel free to call me out. Don't think that you're going to hurt my feelings. I'm still learning, so I hope you'll join me in that process. So anyway, back to boring internet stuff. So for the last I don't even know the amount of time, I've been working with two other guys who you may know of, Brent Jackson and John Otander. And they have full-time jobs, and I've been fortunate to not have a full-time job. And at the end of their jobs, they come home and complain to me about the stuff that they think is wrong with their jobs, and I complain about the stuff I remember being wrong when I do work. And then we try to build tools to fix those things. And we build tools to fix those things because we're lazy. But I also think that we build these tools because we collectively feel like we've lost our way a little bit with how we were using computers. And so I'd like to talk about how humans use computers. Because I think that we forget that most of the problems that we have to solve are just two problems: input, output. That's what we're facilitating. Sometimes we make it more complicated than that, but it's input, output. I'm just trying to get people to type stuff into a box, hit submit successfully. It's amazing how many times I've screwed that up. And these are the ingredients, right? You have a computer, you have a user, and a task. Does anybody recognize this quote at all? It's from The Origin of Species. Title's in there. And I've highlighted the word philosophers because I read The Origin of Species a number of times. I never noticed the word philosopher. And this is the opening sentence, or opening paragraph. I never noticed the word philosopher, and I never, ever, ever thought about who it was. It turns out, this is Charles Darwin. He wrote The Origin of Species. And that philosopher he was referring to was this wonderful-looking dude who also kind of invented photography. And imagine inventing photography, and like this is the photo people are tossing up when they talk about you. And so Herschel had written a book during Darwin's senior year in college, and it talked about the scientific method and made a push for inductive reasoning rather than like deductive reasoning. And this had a profound effect on Darwin, according to him. So in 1833, Darwin gets on the HMS Beagle, which I think is a super weird name for a boat, and takes off sailing around the world, trying to learn about the world. So imagine like how excited you get when you meet somebody who knows the same stuff about like JavaScript debugging or CSS refactoring. Basically anybody in the industry where you see their opinions, you respect them, you really look up to them, and you sit on a boat for 4 years thinking about something, and then you get to talk to this person. And so that's what happened. He's on this boat, 1836, goes to South Africa, because that's where Herschel was living at the time, got too stressed out about London, moved to South Africa to literally just draw pictures of all the plants that were there that were undocumented with his wife. That to me sounds like the original Instagram hipster lifestyle. And so Darwin leaves, and about a year later, he draws this, and I'm very sorry that it's white, and I know it's very bright. I've actually been working on this talk for a long time, and I just found this image, even though it's on Wikipedia. I love this, because this is what his concept of evolution was, and at the very top, if you can read that chicken scratch, it says, "I think." Because this is literally his like first sketch of it. But Herschel had kind of already talked about the concepts of evolution before Darwin did. So you can tell that like they probably got to walk along the countryside and like chat about all these things. And the image of that brings a huge smile to my face. And so that was in 1837 they drew this. And this is how most people think about evolution. They think about it as kind of a progression. And this image is a little misleading, possibly because of the definition of evolution. And we think about it as this line, right, towards something. But this is actually what evolution looks like. Just branches and branches and branches. And the creation of something does not necessitate the extinction of something else. It happens, but... so he goes on to write The Origin of Species, and he doesn't get it published until 1859, 20-something years. The thing about one of the most seminal scientific works just sitting and not being printed for 20-something years. The title of my talk, The Past and Future of Styling UI, and probably think we're starting so far back in 1830-something that, well, we'd probably jump forward from here, but we are not. We are going to go backwards. I don't even have time to talk about John Herschel discovering a bunch of moons on Saturn and Uranus and a bunch of other planets. Very well known for astronomy. We're going to go back to 1821, though, also with John Herschel. Because if you influenced the concept of evolution, and that was the only thing you did, I feel like drop the mic, like walk away. My mom would brag about that forever if I did that. So 1821 in London. This is what London looked like. And people are really bad at visualizing history. And according to the internet, this is a painting that takes place in London in 1821. And this room is kind of what I imagine what it looked like, where John Herschel was hanging out with this guy on this particular night. And they're sitting around, and it's like a Friday night, I think, and they are just looking at tables of data, as one does on a Friday. Netflix wasn't around, so probably didn't have that much to do. And they're doing it by candlelight, because this is 50-some-odd years before the light bulb's even going to be invented. And they're poring over these tables of data, and so much of the data is wrong. And that depresses them for two different reasons. One, people make decisions about how to live their lives, how to make decisions about their business based on this data. But it also took a lot of work to create all this wrong information. And so this guy gets really frustrated, and all of a sudden he exclaims, "By God, I wish that these numbers had been executed by steam," which is a quote I could unpack for a long time, because I love the fact that his concept of like automation is steam, right? And this is 200 years after the first steam engine hit the market. So the person who said that was this guy, who you might not recognize, but it's Charles Babbage. And so he literally comes up with inventing the concept of the modern day computer because he's mad at spreadsheets. So you think about that book didn't get printed for so long. And we're going to go back even farther to the year 600. And it was awesome to see a comparison of radio to the web. Because I'm going to talk about the phases of print. And the first phase of print was this. You carved a page, and that was it. You could print that page. I can't think of any analogs of how I've written CSS in my life, except for this one. This is CSS that was written not that long ago. And I can't help but think about that concept of a page and think about code that I've written that looks like this. And here's a close-up. You have this illustration mixed with type. And again, I really can't help but thinking that my concept of reusability when I started writing code was kind of the same as carving a page. And so this is what one of those carvings looks like. You might recognize this. This is the Gutenberg Bible. And Gutenberg did not invent movable type. The Chinese did that many years before, but they just had so many characters it wasn't as practical. But when you only have a few, like we do, it was a lot easier to make movable type make sense. And this is what's known as the second phase in print. And I can't help but think about the parallel with this rise right now of design systems that we see, and less. How many of you have ever gotten a spec that you had to implement that was like an entire page? There was a graphic of a page, right? And you go and build that thing. But now we're starting to see padding, spacing, like these very, very small bits that we can mix around indefinitely, infinitely, and get so many different combinations. And I think that that's a really big deal. Feels like we're collectively merging into the second phase. But there are still people who write CSS the other way. They write it encapsulated to the page. I think that's okay. This is how evolution works. It branches. With these design systems, they get very, very small, right? It's just like the letter A. This is a whole bunch of documentation for an avatar. So print was a really big deal. Think about how small your computer is, and then think about how many people it takes to print all these things. Very impressive. I'm way too lazy to build a machine like that. So this is a quote by Albert Einstein, and I think that in our age, we probably underestimate this huge monumental shift that happened when you could just print information and give it to people, right? There are people, that's all they did was try to learn, and they would travel around, and they would not be able to, an entire lifetime, read the amount of stuff you could get on your iPhone sitting here in the span of a day. And that, to me, is nothing short of amazing. Think about how much information is packed into this photo. But it's not as much as this. This is a much denser library. And so we're kind of in this third phase in print, which is all digital. And anybody can do it. You don't need a type machine. You don't need anything but some digital device. You can go to a public library, write a thing down, publish it on the internet. That's kind of amazing, right? We're starting to hear voices that were difficult to hear before. And I lose a lot of sleep thinking about how much information is trapped in people's heads that they don't get out, that could be useful for all of us. So now we're actually going to jump forward to the year 2015. So I come across this article. I don't know if anybody read it. If you haven't read it, it's really worth your time. It's 40,000 words of amazingness. But there was one line in particular that I remember exactly where I was when I read it, which was this, and it probably didn't jump off the page to many people. But the notable part here is one study by a researcher at the University of Hawaii found that 88% of spreadsheets have errors. like, we invented computers, right, to fix spreadsheets. I saw that and I thought, wow, well, either we've made zero progress or spreadsheets were 100% wrong and we've like moved the needle 11 to 12%. But I'm a really skeptical person, so this sentence wasn't enough for me. I had to go look up this study and read it. It's amazing. And you probably can't read this, but over the course of time, they get more and more errors. And it's not because people are making more errors in spreadsheets, it's because the auditing tools are getting better. And so I've highlighted some of my favorite quotes from that spreadsheet you just saw that catalog the severity of the errors. I love the dry humor of this too, this auditor, quite serious. Off by 16%. I don't know how much money you have. I think if I was making spreadsheets that might be off by $1 billion, I'd rethink my finances. This one's my favorite though. So they looked at one company, there were 25 spreadsheets. 11 of them had errors, 10 of them had non-trivial errors. And this is the breakdown. So this is, again, the exact problem they were trying to fix, sitting around a table by candlelight, is people have these businesses, they make decisions, but the spreadsheets are wrong. And I can't help but think that, like, we have self-driving cars on the road right now. And they're not perfect, but I'm wondering, are spreadsheets literally the most impossible problem to solve? Or self-driving cars really easy? Or did we just forget about spreadsheets? Because spreadsheets have, they're invisible, right? There's so much invisible stuff that happens. And that's what I'm interested in. All of us, in our jobs, if you think about it, most of what we do is just trying to establish feedback loops. When you're debugging something, you're just trying to get, you're like, I want to see this state, and I want to edit it and modify it, and I just instantly want to see my edits and modifications and what those are going to do. And it is astounding to me how much work I spend doing that, and how many things I break because I just have no visibility into all discrete states a UI can have. And so when I think about this, this is I think a stolen quote from Brett Victor. An interface being an extension of a person, right? You have a user, a task, a computer. And I spend so much time trying to get people to write better code, which I think is a noble pursuit. But I also think we're just never going to live in a world where everybody writes perfect code. There's always going to be a bottom 85% or a top 85%, depending on how you think about it. And so I get really frustrated, though. Make these PRs, break interfaces. There's all this back and forth, trying to set something up. Well, what do you mean I broke this? How do I replicate that interface? Adam, just go through these 17 steps that nobody ever wrote down before, and you'll see this one state of the page and then edit that. So every time you write a line of code, you've got to go through all these steps. It's a very slow process. And when I think about computers, I think about them working for me. I want them to work for me and us. So this is what I'm excited to show you, because we have been thinking about this for a long time, and we think about like the exact way we want to work, not how the computer tells me to work or my friends to work, but how we want to think and how we can use a computer to be an extension of that. So visually, this demo isn't going to be that impressive, but I'm hoping that the proof of concept is exciting to you, because it's really, really, really exciting to me, because I'm lazy. And I think about just not doing work eventually and laying around with my cats and looking at cat gifs. So what I want to show here is when I build a component, I learned from Stubbornella, Nicole Sullivan, the first thing you do is you write down what you know and what you don't know. And a lot of times what I don't know has to do with content. Is it going to be present? Is it going to be different? Is it going to be really long? Is it going to be really short? And so we built a mechanism to just pass through all this content, and we can stub out, or we can automate stubbing out all the various forms of content that we want. And so all the stuff that you're seeing right now, we can change the typography. We can change the theme. We can separate all these concerns or also combine them. And all of this has been one component, the whole thing. And now we're rolling through different components. And you start to see even a really simple component can have so many states, like thousands, maybe millions. But I think that's what computers were kind of invented to do, help us think through these things. We shouldn't have to do manual work to see this stuff. So this is a different component so that, I'm not a complete one-trick pony. But it's the same concept. We are going to go through, and we can change the amount of items in an iterator that we want to see. And we can also just, again, pump through a bunch of different content, look at different colors. So these are color permutations, right? So if I have a color palette when I'm building a new website for a startup, and they give me like 3 different color palettes their branding agency is thinking about, and then within each color palette, they want a bunch of different uses of that color palette. So just reordering all the colors, because this is all I'm doing manually, is literally this. And you're looking at it cycle through a bunch of things, but what's actually going on is that they all exist at the same time, right? So we could actually just create a grid and look at a component and see all of the states, which would make my development life a lot easier. So now if you flash forward, and we use this to build super responsive, super performant components. And we all eat from the same bowl, as my friend Colm says. But we're not very good at eating from the same bowl, right? Like, there's not that much stuff on the internet that is new. Like Dropbox. You look at it, and they've got a dialog box to download a file. It's literally the same thing as everywhere else on the internet, but they wrote code themselves to make that happen. So if you think about this world of just having thousands or millions of components, then you start to have new problems. You start to have new issues. So even if you didn't have to build components, we still have design issues that we need to address. One of those things is, how do those components get combined, right? And for me, I like to see everything. So, but I also maybe just want to see one thing. Hello, friends. So this is a super simple website. It is not amazing at all. Again, I was just trying to make a proof of concept to show you. And so this is the matrix now, and on the bottom, we have a variant of components, or sorry, on the x-axis, we have components, and on the y-axis, we have palette. And we can change these things. We can define what we want to put on the axes, and then we can change how many variants we have. And you can just get this massive grid of all the possible combinations of these components. And that's really exciting to me. This is more how I want to work, right? I don't want to spend time to get to this state. So when was the last time you designed something and kept 200 designs in parallel, right? Keeping 3 designs in parallel is almost impossible. We've come up with all these tools, layer comps in Photoshop. Sketch is amazing, to look at a bunch of things in parallel, but it's not necessarily representative of the actual code and what's going to get built. So I think that this is a world we could live in. Sometimes when I describe my concepts of kind of UI as a first-class citizen, people tell me, oh, it's too many states, like, it's too much code to write. We don't want to have to write all those tests. But the thing is you're already writing code that can generate every discrete state, right? If a user can make the interface look a certain way, you wrote code that can generate that. So just think about it ahead of time and make it so that it's automated, the output. So oh no, how do I, there we go. All the cool kids use Keynote, but I use Finder. So these are my 2 friends that I've been working with on this stuff. And they're really awesome people. I mean, I'm biased, but the only reason I get to work with them is one day I asked for help. I was out on a run. I've been trying to do all this stuff by myself for so long. And I just kind of felt like I hit this barrier of like things I could get done on my own. And so I get back from my run and I sit down and I immediately email John Otander, who had worked with my friend Jackson and I on CSS stats and had just made all these amazing pull requests, and we had never met him in real life. And so for me, it was a little bit I was a little bit vulnerable to say like, hey, I really need help. Would you be willing to help me? And the reason I asked for help was I had come across this Kurt Vonnegut book called Bluebeard, and there's a nice, very short write-up in the Kottke website about it. But it talks about what you need to make a revolution happen. And it says you need 3 different types of people. He's very specific about the types of people you need. I don't know if that matters as much. It's a nice story of the specific 3 people, but I think that the number 3 is kind of the big thing. And the gist of it is, if you don't have 3 people, you can forget about changing anything at scale. And so the course of all this research, all I could think about, because there's so much stuff that didn't make it into my talk, the thing that made me the most sad, besides the fact that almost every story is about a white male, so I know that a bunch of people got written out of history, right? Like, I know that people that weren't white males made contributions. But the other part is that there were so many males who kept stuff to themselves. At a competition, they didn't want to share ideas for a variety of different reasons. Some of it's just insecurity. Some of it's you don't think that people want to hear your ideas. But I think that's baloney. I think that we should share. And we should be kind to each other because we all use the internet. We're all building interfaces. We all have parents that consume them, sisters, people we know. And so I have one takeaway for you. I want us to all dream bigger because I think that, like I said, I think we lost our way a little bit. I don't think that we sit down and go, I'm going to use this computer to really augment how I do work. I think we sit down and, at least for myself, I just kind of will passively use a computer for 8 hours, right? I'm like, oh, I'm just going to iterate on stuff, and I'm just going to sit on this desk and do this thing. I don't necessarily proactively think, this is the exact problem I need to solve, and this is exactly how I'm going to do it. And so there might be some people out in the audience that are like me and bad at asking for help. And so I encourage you, dream big. Think about the world that you want to live in. And don't put bounds on it. And start your revolution. Thank you very much.